Hello, and welcome back to the Pos-cast with Rabbi Shmuel Posner and myself, Seth Hellman. We're on video this week. You can see our lovely faces, get a great view of half of the rabbi's beard. How are you doing today, Rabbi?
It's enough. How much do you have to see?
Well, I mean,
listen.
Yeah.
All right.
Some people like to learn visually, though. It's easier for them to connect when they get to see your face, or in that case, your desk. As you people can tell, we're currently on Zoom. We are not face to face, as we mentioned last episode. So any technical issues are a little bit difficult to deal with from 50 miles away, give or take. So just bear with us as we get through this first remote episode of the series. But so, Rabbi, we got past through Lag BaOmer, and now we're entering graduation week, which will then be followed by Shavuos. And learning is something that's very popular around Shavuos time. And right now, well, I shouldn't say right now, for until tomorrow, Daf Yomi and Chabad are both learning the same Masechta. If you're part of Daf Yomi, you finished Sotah this morning. If you're me, you're finishing Sotah when we finish recording this podcast. But we're both on the same Masechta. And so I'm curious if you have any particular anecdotes that you've come across in your learning so far. I don't know how far in you are at this point. You've got a long way before you need to be finished. So
yeah, not that long. It's next week.
Really? It finishes next week for you?
Yeah, because we do one page a day.
Oh, I thought you guys did one a year, like one Masechta a year.
The reason why we learn tractate Sotah during this time is because Sotah has 49 pages to it. So we literally learn from the second day of Pesach. We learn one page a day. So we're going to be finished. We're rolling right along. We'll be finished by next week. And the connection between Sotah, aside the fact that it's 49 pages, but the connection of Sotah to the time of the Omer is because it's a preparation for Shavuos. Now, what's unique about the Sotah, who was a woman who's accused of being unfaithful to her husband, in the sense that her husband says, do not be in private with this man, and she goes and he's in private with him, and then the whole business. And there's a very fundamental teaching in Tanya that Rebbe quotes about the Sotah, and later on in Chassidus we find it again. And that's the idea that when it talks about the woman who's unfaithful, the Torah uses the language ki sista ishtay. Sista comes to the word, it's spelled taf shin tes hey, has the word shita or yata, which means to turn. So when a woman turns away from her husband, what does it mean turns away from him? It also means to turn away from the proper path of behavior. So if you think about turning, you have the middle way, then you have going above the middle way, and then going below the middle way. So there's the norm, the straight way, and then people can veer above it or below it. And that's the whole idea of, in Hebrew, the word shtus, shin tes vav taf. In Hebrew, it's commonly talk about people say, shtuyot. Shtuyot means like, it's foolishness. So being foolish is when someone does against the will of Hashem. Because if God tells you to do something, obviously you should do it. That's like logical. Doing something contrary to what Hashem wants is illogical. A woman who defiles herself by being with another man other than her husband is doing an act of foolishness, of folly. The Alter Rebbe uses that to say that in essence, every Jew wants to be connected to Hashem. And when they're not, and you see that. You'll see that people, the Alter Rebbe uses the example of people would give up their life not to bow down to an idol. We can use it in more common terms. Say to somebody, meet a Jewish student, would you ever eat on Yom Kippur? Okay, some might say, yeah, but generally, someone aware of the Jewishness, no, Yom Kippur, never, I would never eat Yom Kippur. But I would drive on Shabbos. Like, What's the difference? Like, it's all part of what Hashem wants, Hashem doesn't want. So the woman who would give up her life not to bow down to an idol, even if it would cost her life, will not sacrifice the desire to commit a sin. And the same is to every other Jew. So that Alter Rebbe gives that as advice. You're looking for a way to keep yourself on the straight and narrow of Torah and mitzvahs. Think about that. You would die rather than bow down to an idol, which means you're denying what Hashem, that God exists. Now, if Hashem says, I want you to eat kosher, I want you to keep Shabbos, when you put on tefillin every day, and you don't do that, you're denying, in essence, you're denying what Hashem wants you to do. So that's equivalent to idol worship. You're going against God. And so that's what the concept of Sotah. And what we see by the Sotah woman, she has to bring her sacrifice is brought out of barley. Usually the sacrifice brought in the temple is brought out of wheat. Barley in Talmudic times was considered, or in the Torah time, when back in the day, maybe not so much today, barley was considered to be animal feed. So we say that's the more, and so this says, we do things to her, the way she's treated is the way we assume she did with the person she was having the affair with. So you act like an animal, we give you animal feed. Then, we disturb her hair, we disturb her clothing. All this is like parallel. You do this, we're going to do that back to you. You put on fancy clothing, we'll make you wear nasty clothing. You dress up your hair, we're going to mess up your hair. That kind of stuff. So the idea of barley being animal feed, that's the sacrifice, and the meal offering that's brought in the temple during this process of finding out the Sotah is guilty indeed, is animal feed. The same thing is also on Pesach, when we bring the first Omer offering, which now we're counting the Omer, it was brought also out of barley. And the first wheat offering is brought on Shavuos. So what's the idea? Why we bring barley on Pesach? That same idea that when Hashem comes to the Jewish people in Egypt, he reveals himself to the Jewish people in Egypt, that's connecting to the godly soul of the Jew. Then the Jew has to transform and channel their animal soul towards Hashem as well. So that's why it starts with a barley offering. And then you count to 49 days. So therefore, the idea of the Sotah, who's dealing with an animalistic urge, and during the time of Omer, that we're dealing with elevating our animal self to the point that we're one combined unit, godly soul, animal soul, all focused on Hashem, then we're being a wheat offering on Shavuos. And not only is it a wheat offering, it's chametz. Contrary to Pesach, when you eat matzah, which shows nullification to Hashem, now we're embracing our full self. Our chametz is also permitted. Why? Because it's focused towards Hashem. It doesn't represent arrogance and distraction from Hashem. Quite to the contrary, we're taking our full being and we're bringing it towards the service to Hashem. So that's a little bit of a Sotah thought that we have as we learn the Gemara and all the different details and all the stuff they have there. Now, graduation. Have we spoken about graduation?
I think we mentioned it perhaps either last episode or the episode before, because we were discussing, very briefly, we discussed students that kind of move their way through the Chabad house, right? You have a new crop every year, and every 4 years you lose someone. So
right. So graduation is a very interesting time. So what's our feelings? Connie and I, what do we feel about graduation? Are we like happy? Like, oh, wow, you graduated. Mazel tov. It's wonderful. It's great. Yeah, it is. But it's also, I can't use the word sad because in Hasidic terminology, the word sad is treif, doesn't fit in. But it's a bit of a down, so a little bit of a downer, because here are these kids that came in 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, whenever they finally joined and came regulars, and now they're leaving. So you finally got to know them really well. They become part of the groove of the Chabad house, and now they're gone. And yeah, they'll stay in touch, but as much as they do, it won't be exactly the same thing. And it's also, it's a very dynamic relationship with the students that are here. As you know, we're learning, we're engaging, we're talking, we're challenging, we're challenging each other. I'm challenging the students to up their game in Yiddishkeit. They're challenging me to explain it to them, to represent it in a way that they can relate to. So it's a very dynamic relationship. And now it ends. It ends. It doesn't end that we'll never talk again. But that idea of like seeing each other every Shabbos or seeing each other a couple times during the week, all that is sort of like, okay, that's not happening anymore. So it's a bit of a like, oh man, I can't believe it. Look who's not going to be here anymore. Look who's going. And like I said, I think a lot of people listen to this Pos-cast are, I don't know who they are exactly. I don't think, do you know?
I
No.
mean, I see the names, but most of the names are
Oh, you do see the
from well
names?
before my time.
I don't see any.
We get comments on the
No, I'm not talking about
the
the
YouTube.
comments. Yeah, I see the comments. People actually, listening, and people have told me that they're watching, listening, and now watching. But yeah, that's one of the things that that one of the ways we can. This is a great medium for and to stay in touch. I think in the email I said, if you miss the Friday Night Shabbos table at Chabad House, click here for episode 3. Now this will be episode 4 of Pos-cast, and you'll feel like you're back in Kenmore Square at the Shabbos table. Yes, that's a great way that we can say, stay in touch. Aside from the email they send, that some people actually tell me they read it, which is very gratifying. So yes, that's graduation, and we hope that people take with them what we've learned and studied. If a guy starts putting on tefillin, we hope he continues doing that. Shabbos, whatever Yiddishkeit, Jewish attachment they might have gained here, they should keep it going and increase it. In fact, and I think I mentioned before, like when somebody says, I went to X or Y, I went to New York, went to Los Angeles, went to Chicago, whatever, Baltimore, wherever they went to. And the Chabad is just not like the Chabad house in Kenmore Square. So, I don't go there. Like, no, you're missing the point. It's not supposed to be the same. You've grown up. You're an adult now. It's a different story. But if you listen carefully, the message is going to be pretty much the same. The Rabbi and the Rebbe are not exactly the same, but we're all drinking from the same well. So that's what I really hope. Wherever people go, after they leave Boston, they'll still stay connected and continue their growth in Yiddishkeit.
So if you were to look back on the last 4 years with this year's graduating class, what is one particular memory or Shabbos or lesson, whatever it is, that stands out for you?
Yeah, that's an easy one, because it's clearly COVID. I mean, that's I think a lot of people don't even think about it. It's like a distant. I tell somebody, what happened in COVID? It's wrong with something that happened like 40 years ago. It happened 3 years ago, when it started 3 years ago. I think that was really defined the 4 years, if you wish. I mean, and it's really wonderful that now, like in the past year, it's not an issue. It's just not an issue. Nobody talks about it. It doesn't affect our behavior. And Baruch Hashem, we're like really back into the regular, connection to each other and stuff like that. But I think to think back about what COVID did, well, the first part is obviously when everyone went home. So that's put that on the side. But when people came back in September, after the 6 months after COVID started, and there was all the restrictions. I wasn't allowed to get into any of the school buildings. You had to be on the BU program with your phone and the whole business. So that curtailed any type of active recruiting, face-to-face recruiting when it got cold. I mean, when it was warm outside, we table outside. That was one thing. And besides that, not every student was back. I mean, a large percent didn't come back that semester. But the students that did come back, we formed this very, very tight bond of chevra at the Chabad house, like every Friday night. I don't know if you remember, but there was some time that there was a Boston city regulation that no gatherings after 9 o'clock. And we had to finish Friday night. It was wintertime, it wasn't such a big deal. And so we were keeping the rules because we want to get in trouble with anybody. So we would make sure to end at 9 o'clock. And then what would happen was the 15 students, because that's how we have, that's how many people were coming. And that's how many people we were safely able to distance, everybody at their own table, whatever. They'll go upstairs to the front room. And I had this memory of walking up the stairs with Chanim and say, they're sitting too close to each other. They're not wearing masks. And I'm like, it's not our problem. We don't, they're adults. Some are wearing masks, some aren't. It'll be okay. It'll be fine. just the idea that, and then you guys would sit there like till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, I would say, because they were talking about Chassidus and they were talking about Torah and the Parsha, and that's why they were sitting there. The truth of the matter
I don't think
is,
that's necessarily the topic of conversation.
I think the reality was that there was no other place to go, because at BU, all the public socializing places were shut down. So, but be as it may, and all the hardships that we had during that time. But that was one thing that I remember very, very, very clearly, and it was a really beautiful thing, that there was such a bonding between the students. And I didn't stay up with you guys till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, but maybe a couple of hours after eating. And I think that was like a powerful thing. I would say the life lesson is, when you're in a really negative situation, which COVID obviously was, you try to make the best of it and try to see what kind of benefits you can draw from it. I think that the benefits there was, and even when we had the Zoom classes, during COVID, we had like 10, 15 people every single week coming on.
Yeah.
Getting on Zoom. And that was, again, another, and there's one student who joined the Zoom class who had never been to Chabad house, was just looking for a place to study Torah, was not particularly observant, but was looking to, engage. She was engaged in Judaism, wanted to study, and joined the Zoom. And after it ended, started coming to the Chabad house. Now, if it wasn't for that challenge that she was looking for some place to learn and couldn't go anywhere, she wouldn't have joined. So, there's a benefit there. And I think that's a wonderful thing to look at that and say, like, what good do we gain from it? Lessons you can learn, of course, but what good do we gain from it? And that's, yes, that's something I think sticks out about the past 4 years.
It's funny. I have a number of responses to everything that you said. Firstly, so right, you mentioned having, for the last year or so, not having to think about COVID. I think it was actually on our calendar a year ago yesterday that I tested positive when I was in Israel, because it was the last year Shavuos was Shabbos and Sunday, and I tested positive Wednesday, early afternoon, late morning. And so Shavuos starts next Friday, right? Thursday night. Yeah. So I think yesterday was the 1 year anniversary on that. And then when you mention, people hanging out more during COVID, I mean, for me personally, my involvement in Chabad, granted, I got started right before the pandemic started, but my involvement definitely grew, partially because, you're forced to essentially, when we were here fall 21 or fall 2020, spring 2021, you couldn't go anywhere without a mask on. Like, we were even outside. We were walking with masks on, and the only place that you could reliably go and not necessarily always have to be wearing your mask was Chabad. And so it was that nice kind of, I guess, ironically enough, safe haven, even though by not wearing a mask, technically we were being less safe. But you know what? Hashem runs the world, protects us. We were good. In the Chabad house, COVID didn't exist. It was great.
Let's be fair here. First of all, it was during meal time.
Right.
And anybody with any bit of logic saying, if you have 10 people in a room and they're eating a meal, the fact you have to wear masks in between courses just defied logic completely. But more importantly, and to us, for Chani and I, what was most important was that the students were testing regularly, like 3 times a week.
Right. We were getting, in the beginning, it was 3. It was insane.
Right. So we felt pretty safe. We didn't think that was any issue there. And Baruch Hashem, it was. Yeah, that was, that was real.
But it also, I mean, you mentioned, right, the students coming to the class that had never been a Chabad class before, but for me personally, COVID, outside of the Chabad class, right, the Daf Yomi cycle started, and then 2 months later, COVID started. And so the group that I was doing it with went to Zoom, right? They were already putting the recordings up on YouTube, but then they started doing it live on Zoom because no one could be together. And so it created this massive community where, now their YouTube has, I think it's close to over 15,000 subscribers. And in the beginning, it was 200 of us every single night on Zoom. There were a number of nights. I remember one night in particular where it got up over 200, and then I didn't have anything to do the next day. Actually, I worked that summer after school. I worked through the pandemic. Like, I was going into work 3-4 times a week. And that particular day, I didn't have work the next day. And I stayed up until 4 o'clock in the morning on a Zoom meeting, talking with people that otherwise I never would have interacted with because they are in Israel. So it's people who are a 14 plus hour flight away, that I otherwise never would have met, who are some of the people who I am closest with now. And it became a thing where, like I mentioned before, right, tested positive for COVID while in Israel. If I didn't have the support system of knowing all of those people that I ended up knowing, and of course the beauty that is Chabad, because I didn't have a sitter with me, I didn't have a chumash with me, and I didn't have food for Shabbos. And so what it was, the first thing I did, sent Rabbi Posner a message, said, hey, do you know the Chabad rabbi in Tel Aviv? And of course he does. And so they got me a chumash, they got me a sitter, and they got me food for Shabbos.
Right.
So as much as the pandemic was very much not ideal, and a lot of people had their lives changed very negatively, there were, like you mentioned, a lot of positives that were able to be drawn from it.
I think in a way, while COVID separated people, and that was the example of having the people in the Chabanos, it reminds us of Noach in the Teva, when Noah was in the ark. Like, he probably get to know his family really well, because they spent a year together. There's no place to go. So, it brings it in a way, in the same way, the Rebbe talks about this in regards to Asar B'Tevis, the fast day during the winter time, when we fast because the walls, there was a siege around Yerushalayim. That was 3 years later, was Tisha B'Av, the destruction of the Beis Mikdash, unfortunately, which we real very speaking on our days. Amen. So. So it says Samach Melech Bavel Yerushalayim. These words, Samach means like Samech Neifim, we're saying davening, means to support. It means also he came around and surrounded it. But also the word in Hebrew means to support. So the Rebbe says, what does that mean? Support Yerushalayim. He was laying it on siege. And he says, yes, you know what? The reason why the Beis Mikdash was going to be destroyed was because of the lack of unity amongst Jewish people. When you enforced the wall around them, they should have said, hey, we're stuck here together. What's Hashem saying? Hashem's saying we're together. We should have love of each other, have Ahavas Yisrael. They could have avoided the destruction of Beis Mikdash. We would have taken that positive lesson. So I think the COVID thing, where like everybody's isolated. Then Hashem says, you know what? This thing Zoom, whoever heard of it before then? I mean, I guess somebody heard of it, but it wasn't such a popular thing. And then through that, we connected, and people around the world connected. And like you're saying, as far as the Daf Yomi things, there was a lot of Torah personalities that got online then, and now continued and built on it. And there's hundreds and thousands of people that are learning Torah through Zoom and through other mediums like we're doing right now. And that started. If it wouldn't have been for COVID, I don't do that. What are you talking about? Our Talmud class. We have a Talmud class on Tuesday in Cambridge, which started in 1986, I believe.
Oh, one of the greatest years in the history of baseball, when the New York Mets defeated the Boston Red Sox in the World Series.
Thank you very much. So we started a Talmud class on Tuesday, and I remember it was the week before Purim, 3 years ago, when the director said, maybe we should go on Zoom. Like, what, Zoom? What are you talking about? And a week later, we started Zoom, and we're still doing it today, because I had to go to Cambridge. Some of the other people that came to the class everybody had to come from their home, and some people didn't live right nearby. So I said, boom, this is great. So now it doesn't matter. Even people are traveling. This guy once called in from Los Angeles. One guy called in from Mexico, because this gave us the ability to continue learning. It doesn't have the physical closeness to each other, but the learning is still going, and it is face-to-face learning. So it's fantastic. Yeah. So the point is, and I think, graduation is called commencement. Commencement means to go further. You're not finishing something, but you're moving on to the next thing. And we always have to think about life that way. Any experience, even if it's a challenge, it seems to pull you back. Even if it's a point of stepping back, taking a step back, go 2 steps forward. That's the attitude we have to have. And so that's really the lesson we can take with us from the 4 years. Been in college 4 years, you had setbacks. If you took every setback, and you did, and use it as a springboard to go forward, then boom, it's taking a negative and turning into a positive.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I talk about it a lot in terms of my schoolwork and my broadcasting. Many of my formative years of broadcasting, I was watching a stream on my laptop and broadcasting the games that way. That's just how our student radio station adapted itself to the situation. And so you'd be in a spot where you're watching the stream of a game and you're broadcasting with another person whose stream is 5-6 seconds ahead of yours. And so it was very difficult to work through. And I think a lot of people, if they put themselves in the right spot mentally, were able to make themselves stronger and use the difficulties to better themselves.
Right. That's just, that's just the way we approach life. There is no negative. There's only things that aren't the way we thought they should be. And now it's our job to get them back and to find the light in it. And, the expression is the advantage of light over darkness. So the Rebbe says light, not the advantage of light over darkness. That's obvious. So in Hebrew, it's Yisran ha'or haba min ha'cheshech, the advantage of light that comes from darkness. So from the darkness to the light. No, it's taking the darkness and making it into light. So you take a negative situation and say, now this will become a positive. It'll bring something new, better, and stronger than what we had before. And that's and especially, for you're graduating, so now you don't have no responsibilities in college. Where should you go next?
Yeshiva.
Exactly. And especially now for anybody, if people come summertime, what do you people go on a cruise? What are you nuts? You're going to sit on a boat for? Why? A ship is a mode of transport to go from A to B. But if you're ending back by A, what are you going for? Go to some place that you can have absolute benefit every moment and spiritual growth that bring blessings to your life and to your family.
And on that note, I think it's time for us to end. So thank you for joining us for episode 4 of the Pos-cast with Rabbi Shmuel Posner. As we said last week, if you have questions that you want to ask, email me at shelman@bu.edu. Hope you have a great Shabbos, everyone. We'll see you next week.